human power to get what we want, you are risking blowback. And you can try to think your way around it, try to figure out every last possibility. Well, here's what might happen here, here's what might happen there. But there's always going to be that one thing you didn't expect. And today we celebrate, we got the little palms, we're celebrating Palm Sunday. Or to be technically correct, it is Palm Passion Sunday. And we remember the triumphal, and I put that in quotes, triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. We've got the bits of palm fronds, we celebrate, we put them up in the air, we wave them like we just don't care. We have our celebration of Christ's victory in Jerusalem. He has come in triumph. He enters the city with celebrations and with power. Like a great king coming to take his throne, a revered leader. He has the throngs around him, and they are shouting his praises. And anyone who is watching Jesus will say, wow, this is a classic power play. He's going to gather the mobs, and he's going to drive Herod out, and he's going to cast aside the corrupt leaders in the temple. Go, Jesus. Throw him out. And many of his disciples, and probably most of the people who gathered along that road and cast down their cloaks and waved their fronds, were thinking exactly that. This is it. This is the revolution. When it all changes. But even in what seemed like a moment of triumph, Jesus saw further. He saw through God's eyes that kind of power never stands. There is always blowback. Whenever you use human power to destroy, or human power to subvert, it might at first seem to work. Throughout history, look at the empire after empire after empire that have risen. They've grown. And they have destroyed those around them with an iron fist. And they have played their enemies off against one another. But every one of those empires lies in ruin. All of them crumble as the false foundation of their power became the storm-driven sands that consumed them. And Christ Jesus knew that. He knew it as he walked the road that was taking him not to priestly power and control over the temple, not to the throne in Jerusalem. It wasn't where his path led him. He knew, and God knew, that those who saw him as a threat to their worldly power would react. There would be blowback, and it would take the form of a cross. Jesus, being conformed to God, knew that the source of real power was not what people thought. He was not to be a king like other kings. Well, what sort of king was he to be? We heard it affirmed today in both readings. A reading from a prophet, a reading from an apostle. As we heard Mike read to us today from the book of the prophet Isaiah. We heard Isaiah tell us about the suffering servant. You see, Isaiah proclaimed the Messiah. He proclaimed a vision of God's true servant. And this vision was nothing like the vision of the mighty warrior that danced around in the heads of the people who yearned revolution against empire, against Babylon, against Assyria, against Rome, against whoever got it. Christ was not that warrior. He was, as the vision of Isaiah has shown, one who endured hardship, who faced opponents firmly, taking the suffering they had to give back, but relying not on his own power, but on God's righteousness as a response, relying only on God's grace and God's love and God's power to see through. And that is precisely how the Apostle Paul, in his letter to the church at Philippi, describes how Christ viewed power. When Paul explains to that church who Jesus was, he says he is not one who uses his own power to his advantage, even though he knows he is in himself conformed to who God is. He doesn't use that to his own advantage. He does not use that to his own glory. He makes himself a servant. He empties himself of that desire to have control over the world around him, to use God for his own purposes, and instead hands over control of himself, his body, of his life, to God. It is an entirely different approach to power than the one who relies on worldly power takes. Because it does not focus on power. It focuses on self-emptying love. It's not about power. It's about love. It's not about power. It's about having a servant's heart. It's about valuing the good news of God's redemptive love more than life itself. And put